Good afternoon and welcome back for the ecology and environment session. So hope I am audible as well as visible to you all, right? Okay. So we completed a certain aspect of the forestries, more specifically the state of forest report, social forestry, which is in the news, and also about compensatory afforestation management fund and act, right? The process which is involved in there. And also about certain terminologies which are linked with the state of forest report, that is forest area, forest cover, and its ambiguity. Right. Now, we'll continue from where we have left. Right. Then. So, good afternoon to all, and we'll start with where we have left. The previous year's questions which were asked in the UPSC prelims. Now, the question was, as per the law, compensatory afforestation fund management and planning authority exist at both national as well as state laws. Then people's participation is mandatory in the compensatory afforestation program carried out under Kampa Fund Act 2006. Now here, when you talk about this, I never told you that the people's participation is mandatory. People's participation is mandatory. It is existing at the national level and state level. 10%, 90%. The funds which we are given. 10% goes for the center and 90% of the funds will go for the state fund. Right. So hence, this only one statement is correct here. Only one statement is correct. Very basic about the studies there. Then, which of the following types of forest is a teak dominant tree is there? Teak dominance. Now, when we talk about the teak dominance, you should remember that this is associated with India's monsoon forests. Monsoon forest, right? So, monsoon forests are also referred as deciduous forest in India, and here we classify them into two: dry deciduous and moist deciduous. Moist deciduous, and in the moist deciduous, I told that they receive a rainfall of 100 to 200 centimeters, and they are found along the eastern side of Western Ghats, foothills of Himalayas, and Odisha. And there the dominant tree are the teak and the big trees which are dominant there. Big trees which are. So I told you that they are found in the eastern part of Western Ghats, foothills of Himalayas, and Odisha. Right? And this is where we refer them as tropical moist deciduous forest. Then, if you travel through Himalayas, you are likely to see which of the following plants naturally growing there: Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, etc. So there, you should remember that oak you can see there. Rhododendron is I think it is Uttarakhand's state plant. It is Uttarakhand's state plant, rhododendron. And sandalwood you will find in the south, not in the Himalayas. Sandalwood you don't find in the Himalayas. Right. So only two are there. Yes, rhododendron is a state plant of Himachal Pradesh. Okay. So sandalwood you find them in the Western Ghats, not in the Himalayas. You find them in the Western Ghats. Right. Now this is based on basic common sense and basic studies. Then, which of the following statements are read? Proper design and effective implementation of United Nations READ plus program can be significantly contribute to protection of biodiversity, resilience of forest ecosystem, and poverty reduction. Involvement of of Gram Sabhas will not count as people participate under the Kampa. See, when you talk about the Kampa, Compensatory Afforestation Management Fund, when we say, they made some change in the rules. So initially the Gram Sabhas were included, but when you talk about the change which were introduced in the 2022, so there the Gram Sabhas are not included in making the allocation of that. But don't get confused. Gram Sabhas are the part of environment impact assessment. They will be part of EIA, but not in making any rules. So if any state government wants to change the forest into non-forest activity, if any state government, say state government A, if it wants to convert a part of a forest area into non-forest, then in this case it does not need any permission of Gram Sabha after 2022. Before that it was required. Before 2022 it was required. After 2022 it is not required. Is it clear? So here, which of the followings are correct? So all the three are there. I think it is clear now regarding Gram Sabhas. Right. See, when we talk about Himalayas we find at the height, you will find a certain amount which are referred as alpine tundra, and below that, below the altitude, you will find a certain amount of coniferous forest. Right. Then, now, certain questions which were asked in the UPSC mains. Now, the first one is, this is the question which was asked in the year 2023. Describe the major outcomes of 26th session of Conference of Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Right. And what are the commitments which were made by the conference? What were the main commitments which were made by the India in the conference? Now here, when you're writing your answers, it is for 250 words. Any answers which you are writing in your UPSC, you should always remember that the first, it should have an introduction. And second, it should have the content. We call it as main body. Third one is that way forward. And this way forward is also referred as conclusion. Right. Now, describe the major outcomes of the 26th session of Conference of Parties, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Now here you have to remember something. You have to talk on climate change. Then second, you have to talk on something called as UNFCCC. Some rough idea you should give. So definition of climate change and UNFCCC is required. Then you should talk about the 26th Conference of Parties. Then last one is about India's commitment. So these things you should keep in the mind. Now, the moment when you're writing answers, you should first define what is climate change. So I told you in the initial stage that accumulation of the long-term data of the fundamental elements of climatology, long-term data, more specifically about temperature, precipitation, moisture, etc., which are recorded for 20 years, 30 years, etc. We refer that as climate. When these data show changes, we refer that as climate change. That is first part. Very brief. We refer that as climate change. Right. Then next, to address the climate change issues, and sustainability, you should talk about the Earth Conference was held, and sustainability, Earth Summit was held. It is also referred as Rio Summit in the year 1992. And in this Rio Summit or the Earth Summit, It led to formation of 3 conventions and 2 declarations. It led to 3 conventions and 2 declarations. And among these three conventions, one is associated with climate change. One associated with climate change. And we refer that as United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. We refer that as United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And the countries which have signed that, we refer them as Conference of Parties. The countries which have signed, we refer that as Conference of Parties. And this Conference of Parties is the governing bodies of UPSC, is the governing body of United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Next, these Conference of Parties meet every year. The Conference of Parties meet every year. Why? To discuss the strategies and assess the progress. To discuss the strategy and assess the progress. Right. Then you are given the introduction with something about UNFCCC. Then you should mention that. Then you should mention the first meeting, that is COP, where it was held. That should mention. Then the COP 26, where the question was asked. It is held in Glasgow. Now here you should mention that it was held after a gap of 1 year due to COVID. It was held after a gap of 1 year due to COVID. So you have given a complete idea what is climate change. You have given something about what is Conference of Parties. You have given something about United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So this is where the introduction part is very, very important. Right now, after this, you can take a headline and mention them. Then you can mention major outcomes. Here, major outcomes. So here, major outcomes. So when you talk about major outcomes, we should talk about the important points which were discussed there. That is phasing out of fossil fuel, phasing down of fossil fuel. Then it settled the carbon trade issue. That is, unsold carbon credits will be used for first cycle of NDC. Unsold carbon credits will be used for first cycle of national determined contribution. Right. Then third, when you're talking about this, many pledges were taken. Methane pledge was there. Land degradation was there. Methane pledge, land degradation, etc. So you can define certain outcomes of that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Certain outcomes you can mention here. Right. Then next it talks about India's commitments. Now, when we talk about India's commitment, you should remember that India's commitment are represented as Panchamrita. It is referred as Panchamrita. Or 5 nectars, which talks about reducing the usage of fossil fuels, increasing renewable energy sources, planting more amount of trees. So all those you should mention here, India's Panchamrita. So you are given an introduction, you are given a main body, you are given India's perspective. Now, next is about the way forward. Now, when you're writing way forward, this is very factual. So in this factual, if you don't write way forward also, there won't be any problem, because this is completely a factual one. Right. But in spite of that, you can mention that India has shown a very strong commitment. To increase in the usage of renewable energy. a very strong point to reach the Paris Agreement. Strong point to reach the Paris Agreement. Paris Agreement. And this session of COP26, this session of COP26 will make a platform for the next other strategies which will be discussed in the COP27 and COP28, which will bring the Paris Agreement online with their objectives to be met here. So this is what you have to write: the introduction, main body, and the conclusion part. Is it clear? So this is something about the first question. Describe the major outcomes of 26th session of Conference of Parties. Now, the second question, this was asked in the year 2023. The second question: the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has predicted global sea level rise of about 1 meter by 2100. What would be its impact on India and other countries? So here they are asking about sea level and other. Again, when you're writing your answers, first you should mention something about IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So this IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, was created in the year 1988, and it provides science-based feedback to the climate change. It provides science-based data in the context of climate change. Then this IPCC provides assessment reports. It provides assessment report and other data which are very vital to be discussed in COPs, that is Conference of Parties. So you are given some brief idea about IPCC, right? Then sea level it is asking. So next you should mention reason for sea level. Reason for sea level rise. So the first one is melting of the glacier. Melting of glacier because of the global warming. Second one is due to increasing temperature. The oceans are referred as major carbon sink. So they absorb large amount of carbon dioxide, which increases the temperature of ocean water, and this makes expansion of water. So this make expansion, and that will also reach to rise in the sea level. So you are given some idea what is IPCC and what is rise in the sea level. Now my question is, when you talk about the sea level rise, is it uniform in all the parts of the world? Is it uniform in all the coastal areas and islands? The sea level rise, when we see the coastal areas or when you take the island, is it uniform in all the coastal areas? Because some coastal areas are very low, some coastal areas are very high. So that should be kept in the mind. So when you talk about that, it differs from region to region. So that should be your basic point. So the sea level rise, it differs from region to region. Why? Because it is based on coastal topography. And surface configuration. It means some areas where large amount of mangroves are there, will the water enters there? That is surface configuration. Some areas where the land is very low and it does not have any mangroves, water will easily enter into that areas. Some areas, the coastal areas, they are of high above the sea level. If you take Kolkata and Mumbai, the sea level can increase drastically in Kolkata because it is at low sea level. If you take Mumbai, it is comparatively higher. Kolkata is lower side and Mumbai is on higher side. So that's why floods often enter into Kolkata city because of its low level. And Mumbai is comparatively bit higher than that. So hence in the report you will always find that Kolkata will submerge faster than that of Mumbai because of its low altitude, low level configuration, right? So this you should keep in the mind. So you are educating them. So you are telling about this, and then you are linking with that. Now, then the impact of sea level rise. Then the impact of sea level. So you have already highlighted that this is not uniform. Some islands will have more losses, and some islands will be having less losses. And the coastal areas is also not the same. It always varies from one region to another region based on coastal topography and surface configuration. So you have completely given his your perspective. Now the impact, right? Impact. What would be the impact of that on the India and other countries? Now the impacts, when you should put them into properly. Whenever sea level increases, then the submergence of coastal areas. Submergence. Second, when the sea level increases, the waves will be stronger. It will make coastal erosion. It will make coastal erosion. Third, large amount of floods will enter. Floods. It will increase the salinity, because saline water will increase the salinity in that areas. Then fourth, when the submergence is there, loss of a land. Loss of land in the coastal areas, right? Then in the coastal areas, we find large amount of people are staying. So displacement of the coastal. Displacement of coastal communities. Displacement of the coastal communities. Then in the coastal areas, large amount of infrastructures will be there, like projects, settlements. So infrastructures will be damaged. So loss to the infrastructures. Then seventh, loss of life and properties. Loss of life and properties. Now, when we talk about this, so coastal areas are rich with biodiversity, like mangroves or some marine species are there. So loss of biodiversity. Biodiversity loss. Right. Now, when the coastal waters enters into these habitat areas, like those areas are having, say, certain species of animals, and when the water enters there, so they leave their habitat and move outside of their habitat, and that will lead to man animal conflict. That will lead to man animal conflict. Then stagnant water create disease. Stagnant water will create large amount of disease. See how the loss of life occurs. Loss of life occurs when there is a submergence of the water. Loss of life means it's not only about human beings, it's about the species which depends on that areas. Species. Now, when we say loss of life, sometimes when the water level increases, incidences of cyclones will be very strong. So, incidence of cyclones will be very strong. And these cyclones will create huge losses, because whenever sea level is more, the waves which are generated by cyclones will be very high. So that will create a huge impact, right? Cyclones, dangerous cyclones will wash out everything which comes under on that, right? Now when the water is there, flood centers during the cyclones and all, it can bring invasive species. It can bring invasive species, and these invasive species are a threat to the coastal communities. Then if you take the countries like Maldives and all, if they are completely submerged, then it will affect the tourism activities. It will affect the tourism activities. Tourism sector is affected by that. Is it clear, Karan, that how the loss of life is affected by this? So it accompanied by the fast process when we talk about cyclones and floods. Is it clear? So tourism sector will be affected by that. Then deltas. So when the deltas are affected, when the saline water enters into deltas, then it will affect food security. It will affect food security. Food security, right? And then when the large amount of water enters there, then the corals will be found at the depth, so it will affect the corals. It will affect the corals. Right. So these are the points which you should remember in the context of. Right. Now, apart from that, economic activities, coastal areas are always associated with ports. So submergence of ports. So the ports will affect the trade. International trade is affected. Is that clear? So this is what you should keep in the mind. So many points are there. Any few points also, if you mention, that is more than sufficient. Right. This is what the part. Now next is way forward. Way forward. Now way forward here when you are writing, according to the IPCC report, if the present rate of the global warming is continued, then around 11 cities of India, 11 cities means 11 coastal cities of India will submerged by 2100. So hence it is very important. It is very important that we should take to move on to the renewable energy and reduce the emission of greenhouse gas. Reduce emission of greenhouse gas and contribute to reaching to the Paris Agreement. Contribute to reaching to the objectives of Paris Agreement. Paris Agreement. Then only we can reduce the impact of the sea level in the coastal communities. So some rough ideas we can give. So the major thing is introduction part, then this portion, then the impact on the coastal areas, right? So this is again the question which was asked in the year 2023. Overall salinity of the ocean decreases due to melting glacier. See, when we talk about decreasing of the salinity, so salinity of the ocean will decrease. So here the question is on the coastal areas. So even the salinity decreases, it will not be very less. It will not be very less. In spite of that, the water from the ocean, when it enters into the coastal, still it will be having high salinity, where it will affect the agricultural crops. Overall salinity will reduce, but not that drastic, which can be referred as pure water. Right. Next, climate change is a global problem. How India will be affected by the climate change, and how Himalayas and coastal states of India will be affected by that. Now, when you talk again, you should mention the definition of climate change. The same question which was asked. Answer. You should define what is climate change. That is your first part. Then second part is that how India will be affected by climate change. Now you have to write something about India. Right. So the moment when you write about India, you should remember that India is 7th largest in area. Then India is a country with having large amount of population. So at present, we still say second populous. India has a long coastline, 7,516 kilometers. In India, we are having long or large economic disparities are there. Large economic disparities. India, more than 50% still depend on agriculture. More than 50% people still depend on agriculture. Right. Then India is having a very rich biodiversity. India is having very rich biodiversity. Varied biodiversity. Then when you're talking about Indian perspectives, long coastline where large populations are staying, that should be kept in the mind. Large economic disparities, right? Agriculture. Then geologically, India is very complex. It is created into two eras. One is the oldest, and Himalaya is recent. That is Himalayas and the oldest part. And India, when we say It is on the boundaries of the two meeting points. If you say Himalayas, it is where the subduction has taken place. Subduction has taken place. And this region of Himalayas, it consists of large deposit of ice are there. So ice deposits are there in the Himalayas. So we say it is the part of the cryosphere, or it is the part of the third pole of the earth. Third pole of the earth. So certain ideas you should give. Right. Then how Himalayas and the coastal states of India will be affected by climate change. Now you have to segregate that. One is the Himalayas. Impact of the climate change on Himalayas. Now, here they are not talking about any natural disasters. They are talking about climate change here. Now, in the Himalayas, when we talk about the climate change, first one is melting of the glacier, melting of the ice. It will be very, very high. And this melting of the ice will add water to the rivers. Add water to rivers more. And this creates floods in the lowland areas. Then third one is you can mention there in the Himalayas, we find glacial lake outburst floods are dominant. And this I have explained when I talked about Himalayas. Glacial lake outburst floods. Then cloud bursting. Cloud burstings are there. Then due to delay in the precipitation patterns, or change in the precipitation patterns, certain drought like conditions are there in Himalayas, which creates the forest fires. Uttarakhand forest fires, northeast forest fires. Man-made factors are different. Natural factors are different. So this is where you talk about Himalayas. Then next is about the coastal part. Next is about the coastal states. Now coastal states, you can mention the same what it has been mentioned here. Erosion, submergence. So coastal states, you will find the same. Submergence, erosion, biodiversity loss. All these you should mention. Here, right? So you are talking about both areas. Then when you're writing the conclusion, you should mention that India is agrarian country. So any impact of climate change, maybe in the form of droughts, floods, forest fires, etc., will directly and indirectly affects the GDP of a country. That is, farming community and all communities which depend on that will be affected. And second one is, because of large economic disparities, the vulnerability is not same. Vulnerability means the people who are affected. So vulnerability is not same. So hence we can find huge losses will be there. Right? Then third you can mention is that you need to increase the coastal management, like mangroves. Then we should increase adaptability. Just remember, climate change, 3 words you should remember: adaptability. Then mitigation. And then we should talk more on getting the loss and damage. So maybe the 2000 COP29 may come out with loss and damage criteria, and COP29, which will be held this year, may come out with a complete way in which loss and damage can be settled, the fund which can be settled and operated. So all this will have a huge impact on reducing the socio-economic loss in the context of India. So you have to be very careful when you're mentioning the climate change and its impacts. Right. Now, comment on the national. See, Miyawaki is a urban forestry method. Miyawaki is urban forestry method. It is not agriculture, it is urban forestry method, which was introduced by Japan. Right. Miyawaki is urban forestry method. Urban forestry, where along with the small areas, trees are grown along with the other products. So Miyawaki is a type of urban forestry. Don't get confused. Okay. Then comment on the national wetland programs. And again, this we have discussed. Now here you should mention about National Wetland Conservation Program initiated by Government of India and few Ramsar sites. Now you should mention the definition. What is wetland? What is wetland? So wetland means any land area which is saturated with the water. We refer that as wetland. So you should mention that any land area which is saturated with the water, which takes the characteristics of the separate or unique one, we refer that as wetland. Now India has more than 7 lakh wetlands. Out of which 80 are included into Ramsar site. So here you are giving very clarity that out of more than 7 lakh wetlands, only 80 wetlands in India which are referred as Ramsar wetlands. So you are given an introduction what is wetland, and you are given him that India has more than 7 lakh, but still 80 are referred as the Ramsar wetlands. Is it clear? So you should define what is wetland. It can be man-made, it can be natural. So all those you should mention. Then what is Ramsar Convention? Ramsar Convention and definition of wetland. Now here you should mention Ramsar Convention and definition of wetland. So here Ramsar Convention says that any water flowing stagnant, saline, fresh, brackish. Right. Any water whose depth is not more than 6 meters. Temporary or permanent. We refer that as Ramsar wetland. So that definition you should mention here. Then next is comment on India's National Wetland Conservation Program. Now next you should mention that wetland threats. So threats to the wetlands are illegal encroachment, pollution. So that you should mention illegal encroachment, pollution. Right. So 3-4 points which are mentioned, you should mention there. Then next is about the National Wetland Conservation Program. So India initiated a National Wetland Conservation Program in the year 1986 to conserve and protect the wetlands. Then National Lake Program was there, which was in the year 2001. And both the programs were merged in the year 2013. So that complete flow you should take. And there, these programs worked on collecting the data. Collection of data of the wetlands, data of the reservoirs, right? Then making track of all the data. Whatever data are there, you should track them. Then you should always make sure that there should be observations of health of ecosystems. Observations of the health of ecosystems. Here we are talking about wetlands only. Health of ecosystem wetlands. Then create awareness so that community participation increases. Right. Then you should talk about something. In the year 2017, the wetland rules were changed. New wetland rules were introduced in the year 2017, where it created an authority which can prepare the list and the activities which can be performed. So we have discussed that it will create an authority, and this authority will create a list of all the wetlands, and then it will make sure that what should be regulated and what should be restricted. So all those we should mention. And recent you can mention the programs like Jal Shakti Abhiyan, Jal Jeevan Mission, Atal Bhujal Yojana. So you can mention them. Atal Bhujal Yojana, Jal Shakti Abhiyan, etc. Right. So I mentioned. Then we have 80 sites. Out of those 80 sites, you can mention any two Ramsar wetlands by drawing a map. So here, way forward is not required. Way forward, if you are writing, well and good. If not, it is sufficient. In the map, you should draw and you should show that the two Ramsar wetlands. You can give the latest one, that will be more advantage. If you give the latest one, so that will be most advantage. Right. So this is how the questions we have to write in the context of mains. In the context of mains, right? Now, next is Forest Conservation Amendment Bill, which was introduced in the year 2023, and this entered into force as an act on December 1, 2023. Already it has become an act. It has entered into force, that is, it has become an act on December 1, 2023, in spite of many objections, in spite of many objections from environmentalists. Environmentalists have objected. Objection was done. Now, what this Forest Conservation Amendment Bill says. So here government says that, government's view is, they say that it is very important for countries' security, that is, internal security is very important, because many areas are there. Strategically, many areas are there. Strategically, they are very important. They can be near the LOC, they can be near LAC, line of actual control, right? Then LOC, line of control. See, Forest Conservation Bill was proposed in the month of March 2023, and it got enforced in the December 1, 2023. So here we have to discuss that Forest Conservation Amendment Bill, and I'm telling you that it entered into force on December 1, 2023. Still some clarification is required, but now it entered into force on December 1st, 2023. So generally we say it is an act only, but in UPSC, when you talk questions, they ask something about Conservation Amendment Bill. They talk about the basics rather than putting them into act. So you should remember that already it has been enforced on December 1, 2023. Right. So when they ask the question, they will ask something like this, unless and until more clarity is given, because it's a time frame where they are given certain time within that. And recently Supreme Court has given some verdict also in that case. Supreme Court has said something. So let me finish that, then the things will become clear. So government says that it needs a security parts, and strategically certain areas which are LOC, which are near the LACs, and also there are certain areas which are near to the railway lines, or some highways. So where we need to have certain strong steps to be taken. Then there are certain areas which are referred as conflicted areas. Conflicted in the sense, some tensional areas are there. Like the impact of Naxalites and all. Take an example of Chhattisgarh. some areas of Maharashtra, some areas of Odisha. So we refer them as left extremist districts, right? So we find certain security concerns are there, strategical locations are there, railways, highways are there, then conflicted areas are there, Naxalites and all. So these have to be taken into consideration, and there we should make sure that this forest conservation rules, what we say, where the center's permission and all EIA should be there, should not be applied to these considerations. Should not be applied to these considerations. So hence, it has made certain points which you should remember with some data of technical aspects. It says that the Forest Conservation Act 1980 is an important central statute for conservation of forests. Always remember, conservation of forests. It talks about conservation of forest. Plus, it also talks about rules. Now, what rule says? Rule says that it is the rules, or it is the condition. Rules, it is the condition which talks about conversion of forest area. Conversion of forest area into non-forest area. Non-forest areas, like constructing of some establishments, taking some road projects in that areas, constructing some accommodation for paramilitary forces, taking some type of safaris in that areas, etc. So here there are certain rules which we have discussed before the break, where the forest area can be converted into non-forest areas. Now here they says that certain projects are there, certain activities are there, they should be kept out of these rules. They should be kept out of these rules. Then only the faster work should be done. Then only the strategical areas will have faster approval of the projects, by which it will maintain the security of that particular region here. So hence it says that certain areas are left out of the rules. Certain areas are left out of the rules. This is what the bill says, or the act which has been passed. But the environmentalists say that in hurry, it can have an impact on the environmental. The environmentalists say that in the hurry, in the faster approval, or negligence of EI, faster approval or negligence of EI, it will have a negative impact on environment. They say it will have a negative impact on environment. Impact on environment. Right. Now, the same process. It provides that the de-reservation of the forest, that is conversion of the forest or lease, etc., which requires the central government. So that's what I told you. Central government, after the permission, state government will convert. So we refer them as the rules. The rules. Now here it says that it amends the Forest Conservation Act 1980 to make applicable of certain types of land, that is conversion of forest area to non-forest areas. Then it includes the lands. This data you should keep in the mind. Lands notified as forest under the Indian Forest Act 1927 or government record after 1980 Act came into effect. This data you should keep in the mind. Now they will never ask you why these dates. They will never ask you why these dates, but these data are important. Then the act will be applicable for land converted to non-forest use before December 12, 1996. Before December 12, 1996. Because after 1996, Supreme Court has made a definition of forest. We'll see that Supreme Court has given a definition of forest. So it is not applicable to that area. So it is before December 12, 1996. So these are the facts you should keep in the mind. Now the provisions of this act, the provisions of this act is, it says that a preamble has been inserted to broaden the scope of the act. And a new term was introduced called as one adhiniyam. A Sanskrit term, one adhiniyam, was introduced. Very first one. Second, India and its NDCs as well as carbon neutrality has to be uplifted in this policy. So it talks about India's, our country's international commitment to reach to the national determined contribution by 2030. National determined contribution by 2030 and carbon neutrality by 2070. Carbon neutrality by 2070. So this is where we talk about policy. It should be a part of India's NDC and it should also help India to reach to the carbon neutrality. Right. Then exemption of certain strategic projects. Strategic projects concerned to national security located within 100 kilometers distance from international borders like line of actual control and line of control. So 100 kilometers within that, they should be exempted. Directly, you can start constructing roads on that. Then it also says 0.1 hectare of the land proposed near the railway lines and highways. They should also be kept out of the roads. Then it also says up to 10 hectares of the land proposed for the security related infrastructure in the left wing extremist districts. So security related infrastructure means habitations for paramilitary forces, habitation, constructing homes for paramilitary forces, or any type of defense activities in that areas. So left wing extremist affected districts means districts of say Maharashtra, certain districts of Chhattisgarh, certain districts of Odisha, where we find Naxalism and other types of activities are there. So here you don't need any type of the rules and other part. Directly the center can approach in constructing those so that they can provide major security concern in the context of India. Then activities like establishment of zoos, safaris, etc. will be allowed in this area, provided they should have a proper plan. So zoos and safaris will be allowed, and that is where we find certain events are there, like the world's first black tiger safari. The world's first black tiger safari will be commenced in which tiger reserve? World's first black tiger safari will be commenced in which tiger reserve? Any idea? Black. It is the only. It is the only tiger reserve in the world where we are having black tiger. I have explained that when we discussed about the tiger. Simlifal in Odisha. Simlifal in Odisha. Right. So it talks about that. Then it also talks about ecotourism. Ecotourism should be allowed, but it should be allowed with certain norms. It should be allowed with certain norms. It cannot be done in unscientific way. Ecotourism can be allowed with certain norms. You don't have to write entire detail. Just mention ecotourism with the norms and regulations of conservation. Then the state government requires prior approval of center. Prior approval of center for conversion of the government as well as non-government land, government as well as non-government land, allocating for something like compensatory afforestation or any other projects. So state government requires prior approval of the central government to assign forest land to any entities not owned or controlled by government. Any land, state government can allocate that. State government can allocate that either to government entity or private entity. Private entity, but it should get an approval from the center. The same point mentioned. Then assignment of the forest land or lease has been extended. Initially it was only to the private, now it can be extended to government companies as well. Government companies as well. Right. Then central government may issue direction for implementation of any act under the center, state or union territory. Any act or any authority under the recognition of center, state or union territory. So these are the provisions of the amendment bill which had become an act. Now the problem was PIL was filed. And then the Supreme Court has given its verdict. Supreme Court has given its verdict with reference to this PIL, where the environmentalists raise their question that this will have a negative impact on the environment, and they do not have a complete broader definition of forest. So they asked about how you should go with the forest. What is the forest according to Supreme Court, and how this has to be executed? And this is where the Supreme Court has given its verdict that whatever the decisions are there, Supreme Court in the month of January 2024, in the month of 2024 January, it says that you have to take the definition of forest as per the Godavarman Tirumal case, which was given in the year 1996. Definition, what was given in the Godavarman. So the Supreme Court has said you should go with the definition which has been completely mentioned by the verdict here. And it says that any land record as forest in the government datas, or any land that satisfies the dictionary definition of forest. Now, what is this dictionary definition? It says that a large area covered with forest and undergrowth. Large area covered with forest and undergrowth. So it means that according to the Supreme Court, the scope of forest is very large. The scope of forest is very large. And hence it asked all the state governments that by April 2024, government should release a comprehensive record of the considered forest in their union territories and their states. It has given a deadline that by April 2024, the concerned state governments and the union territories, they should define what is the forest according to them, with keeping the Godavarman case as the criteria to define the forest. Why land around roads and railways are exempted? See, generally where we find large amount of the safety, the police personals and protection forces are to be given there. So accommodations of those should be given there. Right. So this is the draft. So maybe issues will be raised, but as present, this is the progress. So hence we say it has become an act. It has been converted, where it has been implemented, but environmentalists are still opposing to that. So just remember what are the act's consideration and what the Supreme Court has told. Now next, we move on to coastal regulation zones. Now, when we talk about the coastal regulation zones, certain points you should remember. If you take India's concern, you should always remember India has a long coastline of 7,516 kilometers. Total coastline is 7,516 kilometers. Right. Long coastline of 7,516 kilometers. Now, if you take the population of India, so here we find 250 million people. They depend, or they are closer to the coastal areas. So large amount of population stay in the coastal areas. And these coastal areas, in the eastern side, we have deltas. We don't have deltas in the west coast. Deltas are there in the eastern side. And these are very important agricultural patches. And these ports, we always know that they handle large amount of international traffic through ports. So many major and minor ports are there. Right? And they play a very important role in economic prosperity. Right? Then if you take these coastal areas, so these coastal areas, they are always rich with biodiversities. rich in biodiversity. Like here we find mangroves, right, and many protected areas, corals, etc. Protected areas means the sanctuaries, marine sanctuaries, which are there in that region. So protected areas, marine sanctuaries in that areas, right? So it is a region where we find economic activities are very, very important, and it is rich with biodiversity. So economic prosperity is there, and it is also rich with biodiversity. Biodiversity, right? Then apart from that, if you see the coastal areas, there is a major threat to the coastal areas. Major threat to the coastal areas. So these threats, when we say, the threats are due to the impact of climate change. Due to impact of climate change, the number of cyclones can increase in that areas. Sea level can increase. Cyclones can increase, and they can become more dangerous. The floods incidents can also increase. Floods can also increase. So this can have a major impact on the coastal areas, that is erosion and submergence. Erosion and submergence. Right. So coastal areas are always vulnerable for erosion and the submergence. Right. So this you should keep in the mind. They're always associated with the erosion and submergence. So here you are mentioning about economic prosperity, you are talking about biodiversity, and also the threat. Also the threat. So it means that you need to have a fine balance between economic development and conservation. So hence there should be a fine balance. Fine balance between economic development and protection. Economic development and conservation. You need to maintain the balance. Economic development should not be hampered by conservation, and conservation should not be affected by economic development. So please remember the statement. So there should be a fine balance between economic development and conservation. Both are the two faces of the same coin. In the name of economic development, the environment or conservation should not be destroyed. And in the name of conservation, economic development should not be destroyed. Hence, there should be a fine balance between economic development and conservation was required in the context of India's coastal regions. Is it clear? And that is the reason why. That is the reason why we made an approach to put this into a very strong point. So hence, for the first time, coastal regulations were issued. Coastal regulations were issued in the year 1991. In the year 1991, based on the Environmental Protection Act 1986. Based on Environmental Protection Act of 1986. The first coastal regulations. Regulations means restricting certain activities, allowing certain activities. So regulation means certain activities are restricted, certain activities are allowed, which may not be harmful to the ecosystem. Then this coastal regulation was amended many times. It was amended many times. Amended many times. Many times it was amended. It means that it has modified by many times. It was modified by many times. Right. And the important modification is in the year 2011. In the year 2011, where for the first time coastal zones were created. The coastal zones were created. and they consisted of 4 zones. 4 zones, which talks about restricting and regulating of certain activities. Restricting and regulating of certain activities. And then again, this 2011 coastal zones were modified. They were modified in the year 2018. In the year 2018, and this was modified based on Shailesh Nayak committee. Based on the Shailesh Nayak committee. Shailesh Nayak committee, which made the changes in the coastal regions here. Which made the changes in the coastal regions here. So this should be kept in the mind. This should be kept in the mind. So the points are: coastlines are rich in biodiversity, flora and fauna, and they provide livelihood opportunities for many peoples who are staying in the coastal regions. Right. So it is generally referred as a transition area between land and sea. Coastal areas are transition area between land and the sea. Right. So sustainable economic development is also required. Economic development plus environmental concern, and they are always affected by tsunamis, storms, etc. And hence, in the year 2011, we created the coastal regulation zones for the first time. First time, zones were created. Zones were created. But remember, the coastal regulations were introduced. The coastal regulations were introduced in the year 1991 based on Environmental Protection Act of 1986. And this is the 2011. And then the Shailesh Nayak Committee of 2018, which modified based on the Shailesh Nayak Committee. Now here we should understand what is this 2011 and what changes were introduced in the 2018. Two changes we have to understand. Now first we will try to understand the 4 zones which were created in the year 2011. Then we will move on to changes which were introduced in that. Right. Now when we talk about any coastal areas, so in the coastal areas we always come across the two terms: high tide and low tide. So when the ocean water is moving towards the coastal area, it will push the water towards the coastal, and we refer this as flood tide. And it pushes the water to the maximum level, and this creates high tide. And the maximum area where it has reached, we refer that as high tide line. This is high tide line, maximum where it has reached. Now periodically after that for next 6 hours and 13 minutes, the water will start moving towards back to the ocean. The water moves back to the ocean, and we refer that as water is moving from coastal towards the ocean. We refer that as ebb tide, where it is again pushed back. And this ebb tide creates low tide. Ebb tide creates a low tide. And this low tide is the minimum water level where the ocean reaches during when it is pushed back or when it is moving towards the ocean. So this is called as low tide. And the water where it has reached, we refer that as low tide line. So high tide line and low tide line. This is low tide line, and this is high tide line. Right. And this geographical area is referred as intertidal area. This is intertidal area. Intertidal area. And generally in the intertidal area, we find the mangroves and other trees are there. Intertidal area, and this intertidal area is rich in biodiversity. It is rich in biodiversity. Biodiversity. Is it clear? Now, in this coastal regulation zone, they have taken the area from high tide line up to 500 meters. Up to 500 meters. And from low tide line up to 12 nautical miles. Up to 12 nautical miles. Right. So this entire area is classified into 4 zones. That is from 12 nautical miles from the low tide line, from high tide line up to 500 meters. 4 zones. We refer them as coastal regulation zones. So remember this. Low tide line, and this is high tide line. And it is up to 500 meters. And from low tide line up to 12 nautical miles. Up to 12 nautical miles. So this entire area is divided into 4 zones. We refer them as the coastal regulation zones. Is it clear now? Low tide, high tide, low tide. Where the water is pushed towards the coastal, we refer that as high tide. Now don't get confused. On the monthly basis, they are referred as spring tide and neap tide. On monthly basis, they are referred as spring tide and neap tides. On daily basis, we refer them as high tides and low tide. Daily basis, which is referred as high tide and low tide. High tide and low tide. Is it clear? Now, we'll try to understand the Coastal Regulation Zone 2011, where for the first time they have been created. Right. Now, if you take the Coastal Regulation Zone, first one. Right. Now, this is an ocean or sea body. Then here we are having this region, which is referred as high tide line. High tide line. Right. So up to this high tide line, 500 meters, you have to take into consideration. Then this region is referred as low tide line. Low tide line. Up to 12 nautical miles. 12 nautical miles. Right. Now, this region is intertidal area. Intertidal area. The region between high tide and low tide. We refer that as intertidal area. Right. Now, from high tide line up to 200 meters. Up to 200 meters. It is referred as no development zone. No development zone. Nothing is to be allowed to construct it here. No development zone. Right. Then, if you take the region up to 500 meters. So this is shoreline, what we say. Shoreline. So in this, we have certain types of buildings which are constructed. certain types of buildings which are constructed here. Built up area. Built up areas are there. Like maybe some conservation plants, or maybe some residential with reference to government records. Certain types of built up areas are there which regulate certain activities, and these are constructed in the urban areas. What we refer them as urban areas, where they are constructed, built up areas. Then this entire patch is the area which is left out of this complete projection. Now here, remember this. So this area where the built up area is there, urban area, built up area, is referred as coastal regulation zone 2. Coastal regulation zone 2. Now this intertidal area, which consists of mangroves and certain areas where you will find certain mangroves are deposited here, so we refer them as ecological sensitive area. Ecologically sensitive areas are there, and this is referred as the coastal regulation zone 1, CRZ1. Intertidal, and where mangroves and other protected areas are there. Mangroves and other protected areas are there. We refer that as CRZ1. So this is CRZ1, this is CRZ2, and this area from low tide line up to 14 nautical miles, this is called as CRZ4. CRZ4, low tide line up to 12 nautical miles inside the ocean, we refer that as CRZ4. And this area is referred as coastal regulation zone 3. Coastal regulation zone 3. This is CRZ3. So this is what the coastal regulation zones of 2011 talks about. Coastal regulation 2011 talks about, right? So they are, remember, this is high tide line, this is low tide line, high tide line, low tide line. This is 200 meters, no development zone. No development zone up to 200 meters. No development zone. Then this is coastal regulation zone 2, built up area. Built up area. And then here we find CRZ1, that is ecologically sensitive areas. Ecologically sensitive areas. Maybe mangroves or protected areas. Protected areas. And coastal regulation zone 3 is this entire area, which is not included in CRZ2 and not included in CRZ1. This is rural area. Rural area where certain agricultural activities are allowed. Certain agriculture are allowed. Certain settlements are allowed. Agriculture and certain settlements are allowed up to 500 meters. And this area is referred as CRZ4. That is from high tide line up to 12 nautical miles. We refer that as the CRZ1. And this region is intertidal area. That is intertidal area. Right. Now this is called as the 4-zone classification, which was done in the year 2011. Now what it says, what these zones allow. These zones, this coastal regulation zones, they say in the zone 1, Zone 1, that is intertidal area and eco-sensitive zone. Intertidal area and eco-sensitive zone, that is in between high tide and that. Natural gas exploration and salt extraction can be allowed. Apart from that, no other activities. Natural gas exploration and salt extraction can be allowed, but no other activities. Then, coastal regulation zone 2. Zone 2, area which have been developed up to or closer to the shore. Up to or developed to the shore. Shore. This is that 2. Right? Area close to the shore. Unauthorized structures are not allowed. Unauthorized structures are not allowed. Only those which are authorized by the government approval are allowed here. Then next is something called as the CRZ3, which talks about the rural and urban areas falling out of CRZ1 and CRZ2. Here, some agriculture related activities and some public facilities are permitted. Public facilities means bathing, etc. Public facilities, those who have visited there. So public facilities are allowed. Then CRZ4, which is from low tide line up to 12 nautical miles. 12 nautical miles. So this is the Coastal Regulation Zone 2011. Then government wanted to make it more transparent. Government wanted to bring more economic activity and also more protection and conservation. So they wanted to bring more changes in that, and hence they appointed a committee under Shailesh Naik. And this Shailesh Naik committee made the recommendations which were responsible to modify the 2011 rules. Modify the 2011 rules, and they were introduced in the year 2018. Introduced in the year 2018. Now, what changes they have been added and what points are put here? What changes have been added and what points they have put here? Right. So first, you should be very clear with CRZ1, CRZ2, CRZ3, and CRZ4. Is it clear? All the 4 zones, are they clear or any doubts in that? The Coastal Regulation Zone 1, Zone 2, Zone 3. CRZ1 talks about intertidal area, this region. It is this area. CRZ is this area. Intertidal area where mangroves are there, plus this. Ecological sensitive areas, mangroves, and intertidal areas in between high tide and low tide. So these are called as the intertidal areas, CRZ1. CRZ1. Intertidal and ecological or eco-sensitive zones. No development zone is outside the 4 zones. See, no development zone, you should be very clear that no development zone is from high tide line up to 200 meters. From high tide line up to 200 meters. It is from high tide up to 200 meters. That's it. From high tide line up to 200 meters. Towards the shoreline, not towards the ocean, towards the shoreline. That is towards the coastal areas. It is called as no development zone. From high tide line up to 200 meters. Zone 4 is inside the ocean. This is away from that. So from low tide zone is zone 4. This is from high tide up to the upper side. See, CRZ4 talks about activities like it is a region where we find certain fishing activities are allowed and certain island construction can be allowed in that areas. International vessels, sport activities can be allowed in that areas. See, CRZ3 and CRZ1. See, CRZ3 is part of an area. It is something like this. You have taken a classroom or your room. In your room, you have kept one table. So the table place in a room is there. So 10 by 10 room is there. In that, you have kept a table or you have kept a dining table. So the dining table in that room is your CRZ1 and left out place is CRZ3. I'm repeating, 10 by 10 room is there. The dining table is CRZ1 and the remaining place of 10 by 10 is CRZ3 minus that CRZ2. So remember, I'll explain it again. 10 by 10 is your room. So one is your dining table and one is your chair. Dining table and chair. Dining table will be your CRZ1 and chair will be your CRZ2, authorized construction. So the remaining part in that 10 by 10 room minus your dining table and chair is CRZ3. Is it clear? So here it is about understanding that. So where you keep your dining table, it is immaterial. Whether you keep them in the straight line, whether you keep them one below the one besides the other, it is immaterial. But understand that the course ecological sensitive areas and the built up areas within that 500 meters, living that area is referred as CRZ3. CRZ3. Is it clear? CRZ and CRZ1. Right. Okay. Done. So this is how you should remember. Now, what changes were introduced? Changes are very simple. Now, government made that we have to make a strong aggression in the context of environmental protection and also conservation. So hence we need to modify, and then they modified that. They modified that. Now, what modification was done here? What modification was done here? Now, you should be very keen in understanding that. You should be very keen in understanding this. Now, they made some changes. One is Coastal Regulation Zone 3, that is rural area, where they divided that into two parts. Coastal Regulation Zone 3A and Coastal Regulation Zone 3B. Coastal Regulation Zone 3A and Coastal Regulation Zone 3B. Now here you should remember, this Coastal Regulation Zone 3A and Zone 3B, they are based on the population of that areas. So they said that this Coastal Regulation Zone 3A, they have considered the population of 2161 of 2011 census. 11 census, right? They say this Coastal Regulation Zone 3B, if its population, if its population is less than 2161, that's an absolute number, less than 2161 based on 2011 census. 11 census. And CRZ3A, where the population of that area is more than 2161 according to 2011 census. So these two areas were created, CRZ3B and CRZ3A, where the population is more than 2061 and where the population is less than 2161. Less than and more than. So this area where the population is more than 2161, the no development zone has been reduced from 200 to 50 meters. So here the no development zone, initially it was 200 meters, now it has been reduced from 200 meters to 50 meters. So it means that the no development zone of zone 3, the no development zone for zone 3A will be only 50 meters. Whereas the no development zone for CRZ3B, which is also rural population, whose population is less than 216, will have same 200 meters. 200 meters. So they have altered the no development zone. They have altered the no development zone. Very important to be remembered. Very important to be remembered here. Is it clear? Now, if you see this area, it is something, it looks like this. This is 2011 and this is 2018. 2018. Now they have altered, keeping economic activities stronger. So they want more economic activities. They want more type of activities which can generate economic revenues. Now here, this is intertidal area. They are not altered any intertidal area. But here, this is what we refer them as the coastal regulation zone 3A. This is CRZ 3A, where the no development zone is 50 meters. And this is the CRZ 3B. And here the no development zone is still 200 meters. Very important, you should remember. Very important change which they have introduced. And again they say that for islands and backwaters, the no development zone is still reduced to only 20 meters. The no development zone is only up to 20 meters. So after 20 meters, you can establish anything. You can establish your hotel there. So only up to 20 meters, the no development zone is there in the islands and backwaters. Is it clear? So please remember these. Now we'll read them with the statements. Right. So this is coastal regulation zone, which is referred as intertidal area. And this is coastal regulation zone, which is in the near to that area. So the intertidal area is referred as CRZ1B. Intertidal area is CRZ1B. And the one which is near to that, it is referred as CRZ1A. Right. So CRZ1A is ecological sensitive areas. This is CRZ1A. And this is CRZ1B. That is intertidal area. CRZ1B is intertidal area. So CRZ1 is divided into two parts, 1A and 1B. Then they are not altered CRZ2B. It has kept as it is. CRZ2 has not yet been altered. That is urban area, municipality areas is not touched here. This is CRZ2B, which is not touched. So this CRZ2B is not touched. Urban area, it is not touched. Right. Then CRZ3A and CRZ3B, which you should be very careful. CRZ3A. It is underdeveloped rural area where the population density is more than 2161. More than 2161 as per 2011 census. And here from high tide line up to 50 meters is no development zone. From high tide line up to 50 meters is no development zone. Right. But if you take the coastal regulation zone 3B, where the population density is less than 2161, and here it has maintained as 200 meters. So from high tide line up to 200 meters, it is no development zone for CRZ 3B. And this is CRZ 3A. Is that clear? CRZ3A and CRZ3B. Now next it says CRZ4A, the water area and the sea area between the low tide line up to 12 nautical miles. So this region. This is CRZ4A. CRZ4A, low tide line up to 12 nautical miles. Right. Then CRZ4B, areas which includes water, where sometimes the tidal influences are there, where the river is meeting, where the stream is meeting. So that area, CRZ4B, mouth of a river. Mouth means the river, when it originates, we refer that as origin of a river. When the river meets to the ocean, we refer this as mouth of a river. Where it meets the ocean, we refer that as mouth of a river. Mouth of the rivers. So these are referred as the 4 differentiations which have been done in the coastal regulation zone. See this. This is 11 and this is 2018. Zonations are there. Now remember, CRZ 1 is classified into A and B. CRZ2, nothing change. CRZ3 is again classified as 3A and 3B. 3A and 3B. In 3A, the no development zone is up to 50 meters, and 3B, the no development zone is 200 meters. No development zone for island is 20 meters. Only 20 meters. Islands and backwaters. Backwaters is 20 meters. Is that clear? So this is what the changes were introduced. Apart from this, see, 4B means these areas where we find the rivers meeting to the ocean, mouth of the water body, where it influences the tides, where the river is meeting to the ocean. For A is from the low tide up to 12 nautical miles. And this is low tide where the river is meeting to the path. Right. Now these are the changes which have been introduced. Now apart from this, what changes have been added here? Now granting clearance for the projects. Granting clearance for the projects or activities. Now this is where they found that this granting clearance or approval has been completely changed. Now granting clearance for coastal regulation zone 1 and zone 4. Granting clearance for coastal regulation zone 1 and coastal regulation zone 4 is associated with the center. So all the activities at the coastal regulation zone 1, that is zone 1A, zone 1B, coastal regulation zone 4A and 4B are with the center. But the approval for coastal regulation zone 2 and coastal regulation zone 3, zone 2, that is urban areas, zone 3, rural areas, population of 2161, more and less. So they are delegated to the concerned states. Delegated to the states. Now the state government take a call, and based on that they can allow the projects or activities in their jurisdiction. Then next is construction norm for FSI. FSI means floor space index. Floor space index. Generally, when you are constructing, FSI is used to check the size of the building. Size of buildings. So based on FSI, 3 floor, 5 floor is allowed. Based on the road, based on connectivity, the buildings are allowed, whether it is having 3 floor, 4 floor, etc., which were taken in the year 1991. Now they have been freezed. Now they have been relaxed. So it means that now you don't have any type of this FSI. So you can construct big one. You can construct the buildings out of no development zone areas without taking the strict regulations of 1991. FSIs are freezed out. Floor space index has been removed. Then relaxed no development zone criteria. So here, densely populated area CRZ 3A will be having only up to 50 meters. And for islands and backwaters, it is only up to 20 meters. Only up to 20 meters. Please remember this. Remember this. Then temporary tourism facilities, toilets, changing, etc., are permitted in the no development zone of CRZ3. So it means that in the no development zone 3, you can construct toilets, you can construct the bathing rooms there, bathing chambers there in CRZ3. Very important one. To promote tourism, to promote cleanliness. Tourism, cleanliness. And then treatment. Treatment means water treatment facilities. Water treatment facilities. Like sewage treatment plant can be allowed. Sewage treatment plant can be permittable in the CRZ 1B. It can be permitted in the coastal regulation zone 1B. Treatment facilities are allowed in this. So this is where we find the changes which were introduced from 2011 to 2018. Right. Is that clear? CRZ 11 and CRZ 2018. Please read them carefully. Read them carefully. 2011 and 2018. Right. They are important in the context of any type of questions which can be asked in the exams. Then blue flag certification, internationally recognized eco-label granting beaches. Standards, we say global standards. And this eco-labeling, blue flag certification is given by Foundation for Environment and Education. Foundation, right? And this consists of environmental and education information, bathing water quality, and environment management and conservation, safety services and beaches. So these are referred as the criteria. Criteria to classify any beach or any type of boat tourism activities as blue flag certification, that is world class standard. And here we find, along with that, 4 organizations are also involved: United Nations Environment Program, United Nations World Tourism, Foundation of Environment Education, and IUCN. So along with this, it is a collaboration of these. It is collaboration of these organizations which help in providing the blue flag certification. And at present, based on 33 criterias, India has at present 12 beaches which are referred as blue flag certification beaches, 12 beaches. And these are the beaches: Shivrajpur Beach in Dwarka, Vogla Beach in Diu, Padbudri in Karnataka, Kasargod, so 3 and 4 in Karnataka, Kappad Beach in Kerala, then Kadmat Beach in Lakshadweep, Minikoy Tundi Beach there, Kovalam Beach in Tamil Nadu, then Eden Beach in Puducherry, then Rushikanda Beach in Andhra Pradesh, then Golden Beach in Odisha, and Radhanagari Beach in Andaman and Nicobar. So these are referred as the 12 blue flag certificate beaches of India. Blue flag certificate beaches of India. Is it clear? So this is something which is factual data, but important for your examination. Facts which is important for your examination. No, many times when I see in the Kovalam beach when they say Kerala, now one is there in Kerala, but this is according to PIB, it is in Tamil Nadu. According to PIB, this is in Tamil Nadu. Tamil Nadu. I have checked that. I checked that. According to PIB, this is in Tamil Nadu. Is it clear? So 12 beaches. Right. So we can have a break. Is everything clear about CRZ, Coastal Regulation Zone 1, 2, 3, 4, and the changes which were introduced? 2011, 2018. Right. So please read them carefully. Read them carefully. Right. Now, next, we can have a break. Then we'll start the class at 5:55. Is it okay? 5:55. 5:55. Done. So after that 5:55, that will be the last session where I'll be taking solid waste management and environment impact assessment. Two small topics are there. So by that, we will conclude the ecology and environment.